Hi, y'all. Welcome to Married to a Shrink. Allie Johnson Calderon here, licensed psychotherapist that specializes in sex therapies and couples therapies. And I have my lovely partner, Michael, here with me. Michael, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hello, y'all. Michael here. Look forward to our discussion today.
Well, good. So today we are going to be talking about how to fight fair and kind of navigating conflict, especially when it comes to easing through our projections, because that's what comes up a lot when we are navigating through conflict. Is most people project on each other their own issues and or struggles into the issue that is being discussed whenever we find that we are in conflict within our relationships. And so my first question to you, my dear, is how would you describe our approach to handling conflict in our relationship?
You like handling conflict very head-on, very direct, which I appreciate. It's not my natural go-to. I think my natural go-to is to more sweep it under the rug. It's not a big deal. It'll kind of address itself. And in our years together, I've realized that's not the healthiest approach. So the way I think we do it now, you voice an issue or something that is troubling you. I'm trying to do the same for myself when I feel something, trying to express it and express it directly. You talk through how you're feeling, or we talk through how we're feeling, why we feel that way, what we can do differently in the future, and then how we're going to rectify it going forward.
So I hear you that's 100% the way I navigate. But again, I don't feel like that's how you navigate.
No, it's not. It's not the way I naturally navigate.
But I would say it's not even how you, yes, I would 100% agree. It's not your natural norm. But I think you also struggle, even though, like with the apologies, even though you know what should be occurring and how we are supposed to move towards or through conflict so we can move towards resolution and connectivity, I still feel like 95% of the time that is not how you navigate our conflict.
Sure. I think some of these topics we've previously discussed, they all are kind of intermingled with each other. The communication, the last time we spoke, I struggle, and I know from us going through therapy and from you being my partner and from me doing my own journey, I know I need to get better about using I terms. And what I mean by that is I need to take the accountability and just come at it from I need to meet you where you are. I think initial reaction, I like to get defensive or provide excuse or rationale. Maybe not excuse isn't the right word, but provide, this is why I did or said whatever it is I did. There wasn't ill intent, but I think, I know that I need to get better about using I terms and staying on the topic that we're talking about. Because I think sometimes our conflict can become so narrow-minded on this particular thing, but then there's a broader issue that you may be addressing, and this small incident was the trigger, and you want to address the bigger picture, and I get sometimes so zero focused on the incident.
You're micro. You are very micro, and I tend to be more macro, to your point. I mean, I feel like that is a true statement. I feel like a lot of times when we are moving through some conflict, I do feel like you get triggered and you get threatened towards, a number of things. And so we're going to talk about projections and all of that in just a moment. But before we go into that, what would you feel like is something we have discord over frequently? Not our largest or our biggest, most pressing issue, but what do you feel like we frequently have conflict over?
I think logistics, just logistics of our family. I think, there's things that both you and I like to do for ourselves. And I think sometimes the logistics of us having children and jobs and careers and it gets in the way. And I think it sometimes creates discord in that we both want to accomplish certain things. And when there are those, I don't want to say roadblocks, but it makes accomplishing those things a little bit more difficult. And myself, I think I can get selfish.
I can't believe you're admitting that to people. I mean, my wife heart is like, but continue. I'm like a little bit in shock right now that you acknowledged that.
I recognize I am someone, for my mental health, I need to make it to the gym. I need some sort of physical activity. I really enjoy pickleball. But on top of pickleball, I still need to do my physical activity at the gym so I can be my optimal self at pickleball. And then I'm always trying to tinker with the cars. And it's not fair that you don't get time. And sometimes I look at it like you're choosing to do some things that could be done, where you could be, doing something for yourself, and you choose to do other things with it. And I think that's where, in my mind, I sometimes get selfish. But I really, deep down, I want to ensure that you have the time and you're given the time for yourself, because it's so important for our self-care.
So no, I don't disagree with the self-care, but I think for me, when you say logistics, I find the logistics are kind of a byproduct or an accompaniment to what I think is our most frequent conflict, I would say, is value systems and communication. I would say that I feel like logistics and the struggles we have over what you would claim to be logistics come out of what I perceive to be a clash in values or a clash in communication or lack thereof. Does that make sense?
On the communications, I can certainly agree. I have a tendency to sometimes to make assumptions or things or...
I think you are really lightening that up for the audience. Would you say that you have a tendency to, or do you feel like it is your default to be assumptive?
It's my default.
And then to not communicate verbally and then you utilize your body language, which again, everyone utilizes their body language to communicate, but then your verbiage doesn't match your body language. And because I'm a gosh darn therapist, I know that body language is more important than the verbiage in any given situation, right? And so when you're telling me, like, yeah, you can have this time, but you're yelling it or using an intense tone or you're kind of stomping around, I'm like, no, I don't really have the grace and the permission to utilize my time in this way, right? And so, or like where you won't communicate that there is something occurring, and then that leads to struggles with logistics because something wasn't communicated and I'm the default parent, right? And so then it becomes my responsibility. And I'm also the one with the more flexibility in her work, right? And so, but to me, all that communication always circles back to where I think our most frequent conflict comes from sometimes what I perceive to be a clash in value over something, right? Where that is where I can find you to what I would be characterized as selfish, what you're claiming to be selfish in terms of I want to do this and all of that. To me, it always circles back to it's a clash in a value that we have in that given moment, where I have a very high value on my family and my animals and like the living things. And to me, like there isn't a lot of purpose in life outside of like love and connection and relationships. For me, that's where my value system really aligns. And on top of that, with my altruism and my deep sense of value in altruism and justice, right? Those are things that really make up my psyche. And so whenever I am finding that you are making a choice that clashes with what I deem to be altruistic, or deem to be just, or what I deem to be based in family, that's where I struggle. And I feel like we have the most conflict.
I think we align on. I think we certainly align. I don't know how fair it is that we don't align on family. I think we absolutely align on family and the importance thereof. I'm not as ultra minded, big picture, global, as you are. You are a true social worker by trade and by heart. That is. I've adopted that as your partner. But yes, I can acknowledge that at times that has been a source of some conflict.
But I'm not saying that you don't appreciate and value and very deeply love your family. I know that you do. All I was saying is sometimes I feel like where our most frequent conflict is where time spent, where I feel like you will choose to spend your time towards something that I would deem to be more selfish, or you would deem to be more self-care. That's what I'm really referring to.
Okay.
Where I am like, to me, this feels selfish. Where you're like, no, to me, this is self-care, because for me, it's not aligning with time spent towards a value system. Because I firmly believe that where we spend our time is what we really value. Because time is one resource we can't make more of, so it's the most precious of resources. And so for me, it's really indicative of how someone spends their time is what they value.
Mm-hmm.
And what brings them meaning, because that's the one resource we can't, accumulate in that. And so with that, so that's kind of like what I would deem as our most frequent is kind of like the struggles that we have around communication. And I really think it's communication. And then sometimes the disconnect in what I perceive to be a value versus what you perceive to be a value, and then how we spend the time around that. I think those are kind of our more major one. I think, to your point, logistic struggles comes out of that. But what would you say is our largest, like our biggest conflict?
You haven't mentioned it? It's not one of those two?
I'm asking for your perspective. If you have one different.
I mean, we've gone through periods of time where I think it's been different. We had some, we've had a season where I was going through previous relationship divorce issues.
Yeah.
That there was a season where that was very heavy, and that was the source of our conflict. Our oldest daughter has medical stuff. Mm-hmm. There's been times where that's been a source of conflict and stress. But I think...
I don't know if we've ever fought over that, though.
No, I don't think we have either. I think... No, fair. I don't think
But I do, and we'll get into this in projections, I do think that there's been a lot of fear based around her medical care, because she has a chronic disease. And with that, I think there's been projections and there have been hurt feelings that have led to conflict. But I don't know if
Absolutely. That's what I
would
think
you agree with that?
That's what I'm referring
Yeah.
to. Like, there's certain things that have happened over the years where I wish we could go back and change, and we can't. We can just move forward and heal and mend those fences. But yes, I think that's what I'm alluding to.
Yeah. I mean, I would say I don't disagree with what you've said. I think when your prior relationship at the time caused quite a bit of conflict in our marriage. And I think since then we haven't had any major, I think family planning and what our future family, I think, has really been the only thing that comes up for us as foster and adoptive parents. We every so often, as things progress and alter in a child's case, we have to have conversations about
Next steps.
and family expansion. I said family planning, but really it's more family expansion, because that gal ain't having a baby. So that's off the table. And so I feel like that is probably the largest one that pops up continuously, but we can't resolve it, right? Because
there's a lot of moving pieces.
Yeah, we can't get away from it, I guess is my point.
I think that's the one where it's very time sensitive, where, to your point, Allie, it's come up. You know, we've had a number of placements, and the way that the placement is going, there's a lot of unknowns, and that certainly has been a source of conflict in our relationship.
I would say that is the largest one.
I think that's the largest
occurs.
one that we've had since the largest one in most recent.
And I think that's going to be the largest one that continues, because we can't resolve it we can't pre-resolve it. Mm-hmm. Right? Like we're working on our frequency which is the communication, and we're actively working to resolve that, so that eases over time. But our largest conflict, interestingly enough, is going to kind of reoccur. Would you agree?
I would agree, and I think that with each time that we go through it, I think we've gotten better as partners with each other. We've learned from prior placements, sore spots, things that cause some tension, and I think we've only gotten better, and I think that will continue to get better. But it will continue to be. It's a stress. It may not be a large conflict, but I think that will continue to move in the right direction.
To your point, bringing another kiddo in your home with so many unknowns, it causes strain on. But I feel like we navigate it pretty darn well.
I think so too.
We do a pretty good job of supporting each other and making sure we're on the same page through it all.
Yes, we've done better with each placement.
Yeah.
The last placement we had was a challenge. It was a challenge.
It was a challenge.
I think we may have bit off a little bit more than we could chew at times. I certainly felt that way. I know there were times where I was like, I'm going from 2 children to 4 children overnight, and one of them being a newborn almost.
Oh, yeah.
It was a lot.
It was a lot. We won't do those littles again. We learned. We're not baby people, it turns out. Well, and so with all of that, how have you learned to kind of what we'll call fight fair, right? Because like you had said, like you didn't come from relationships where y'all did fight fairly, and where and so conflict was avoided, and then you grew up in a home where conflict was never displayed, and it also wasn't normalized, because conflict is a daily occurrence for most people, because it is by definition it's a discrepancy in some variety. Well, we're all different people operating in different ways and different perspectives and different experiences, and so with that there's going to be some sort of conflict. But conflict doesn't inherently need to move to fighting, right? And I think that's something you have learned as you've been with
Absolutely.
me. But what would you say, or when conflict moves into what people would characterize as fighting, what would you say are strategies that are helpful?
I think I'll speak for myself, to take a deep breath, try to understand what the conflict is, because sometimes, honestly, in the moment, if I don't take that step back and take a deep breath, I don't know what it was that caused the problem. Again, my knee-jerk reaction is to be defensive, which isn't the right approach. There's a certain, so I think the lesson is to acknowledge, to try to understand, to ask questions calmly with the right tone of voice, and try to come up with, resolution. But I think it's meeting you or understanding where your partner is in a very kind way. I don't think you could do wrong if you are kind, and use a kind tone. I think, I think that really can lead to successful conflict resolution.
Yeah, and I would add to that, I think something that you have done a good job of kind of working on is you used to really issue compile. And when something would move to maybe something, when conflict would move to something a little bit more contentious and what people would maybe label a fight, you would start to, you know, pile every issue that had occurred in the last, whatever
Because again, I
days
had
or
kept
weeks.
sweeping it under the rug.
Yep.
So if I
Yeah.
hadn't addressed it, but yes, you're absolutely right
And
where
it
you're
would just
going.
all come in, and that would become not fighting fair, right? When we're having to deal with so many issues, well, then you're not really dealing with any of the issues, and then it starts to become so micro, and you start to like rabbit hole down these certain issues, and it stops looking at what we're actually trying to solve for. And so I think that's where fighting can become unfair, is when we issue compile, right? Like when you just
Stay on the topic.
throw everything together, and instead of just focusing on the one thing that we're trying to discuss. And to your point, I think it can also become unfair when people get loud, when people kind of get aggressive in their body language or their tone, or when we characterize, right? When we forget that we're having conflict over an issue, not over the person themselves, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like, when do you think things become unfair in a fight?
I feel like when we do, and again, it's not often. I don't want to make it sound like we are in these
Oh no, we're not.
situations often.
No, we're not.
I think we generally do fight fair, or in those moments
But what would you say is unfair? What would be unfair?
I think for me, it's bringing in the past and things that we can't go back and change. There's times where there's things that have happened where they've been addressed. We've had the conflict with regards to it. I felt like we had resolved, and then in a moment of conflict, it's being brought up as you've done this before, here's when. And it's bringing, for me, I think it's bringing past things that you can't change back to the future, back to the present.
And I know you have said this before, and so my perspective is different, because for me, if I'm bringing something up, it's because to contextualize it, right? And so I try to contextualize it because I need that so that you can kind of see why this is occurring again. And I'm also trying to display pattern, right? To be like, we've been here before. This is this is why. And like obviously it wasn't resolved or else we wouldn't be here again. But to your point, you view this as what?
I don't know. I don't.
Because what you're saying is that for you, you say that things are brought up from the past that you feel like have already been resolved. So you're wondering why they're being brought up again. And my challenge to this is I think that's how you're perceiving it. However, that's not intentionally what I am doing. What I am doing is I may bring up, see, we've been here before. This was the situation XYZ. It's the same situation now, so it's obviously not resolved. So if it's occurred more than 3 times, we've got a pattern here. And I'm also trying to bring up some contextualization because I do view things more macroly, and I see the interchangings of how these dynamics affect our relationship. And you don't see, though. That's not the way your brain works. And so because of that, I will be like, no, this is the issue. And it's been an issue because of this time. And you get frustrated.
Mm-hmm.
And you feel like we're regurgitating a fight.
Yes, that's how I feel at times, yes.
But what I'm asking is, you think that that's unfair?
If you're using it as to display a pattern, and maybe it's not the same thing, but it's similar, I can understand coming from that regard. But I think what I mean is we can't go back and change the past. And at times I feel like when we are in a moment of conflict, something that's happened in the past has been brought up, but not in a sense to compare it, but it's like...
Yeah, I hear you. And I think this is doing therapy on myself right now. This is what I think that is. Like we talked about in the last episode, you are new to being able to give healing apologies. This is a new concept for you. And so for me, something will be triggered and I'll be upset about something because I don't feel like it was healed. I don't feel like, especially if it happened like 3 or 4 years ago, you were not in a place where you could really do a whole lot to contribute to my healing for pains that you had caused, right? And so that is me being like, hey, this is still an open wound. And kind of like we talked about last night, because this kind of occurred yesterday,
Mm-hmm.
right? And you were like, but I've like acknowledged this. And I'm like, yeah, however, I never felt like it's been truly atoned for. And because of that, it's still festering in me. And that's why it's being projected and coming out in this situation.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is where I wish, instead of you kind of being dismissive, what I am deeming as dismissive in terms of, well, I've already apologized for this. Like, why is this being brought up again? I wish there was more of a attitude of, she's bringing this up again. This is obviously still a pain point for her. What do I need to do to heal and soothe her? Mm-hmm. And I wish you came at it more of a place of, Allie, you keep bringing this up. You obviously still have a pain point here. What do you need to hear from me so we can really put this to bed?
And I see that. I just have to get better about doing it in the moment.
Okay. Well, thanks for accepting that feedback. I appreciate that. Yeah, because I think that's what it is. It is for me. But I do agree that it's not fair to throw past like pains in people's face.
What would you say is not fighting fair?
I mean, I think I've already mentioned it. I think it's, getting loud, getting aggressive. I sometimes think it is when people really, how do I phrase this? Where I feel like they start to move towards distractions, to move away from the actual issue, and they just want to start to characterize. That's not fighting fair to me. When you just want to attack someone's personality and
Do
you
you
don't
feel
really
I do
want to
that
talk
with
about
you?
the issue. No,
No.
I don't feel like you do that with me. I'm
No.
just saying that I don't think that's fighting fair.
No, I would say that wouldn't be fighting fair. I think a source of conflict when we're talking through conflict is I can lose being present. Like I truly want to move through it, but I want to move through it, and hit it, and then go. And I only have so much capacity at times.
I would agree that it's a capacity issue. I do think your ADHD does play in, but I also challenge that it's something else. I think you are not great with being uncomfortable.
Yeah.
You do not like to be uncomfortable. So that's one thing. And so you're just like, oh, let's just move on and go through. There's that. I think it's also very painful for you because the depth of your love for me to see me in pain, especially if you've caused it or something in your sphere or because of your life has caused it.
No, we talked about how I get upset with myself when I'm, grew up, I couldn't do no wrong. So when I do something that's wrong and I see the impact from it, it hurts, and I do.
But instead of operating in a place of healing and soothing for me, your shame spirals become fear-based, and your fear reactions are always your most aggressive. Mm-hmm. Right? And so it actually starts to do the opposite of healing for me whenever you do hurt me. Mm-hmm. Right? Like, and so that is where I think some of that struggle comes in. And again, that's why I want to move on to projections, which I think is where what really happens in some of these incidences of our conflict, and when things start maybe become fighting fair, is when projections come into play, and when you start to project on me your discomfort or your feelings of shame or agitation, or a lot of these kind of unresolved things that you have get projected onto me in conflict. And then I get frustrated because I really just wanted to spend 2 minutes solving a logistical communication type issue. And I feel like it starts to be like a victim party. I feel like you start to go into like a victimhood that I just cannot hang with.
You don't like when our children do it either.
Oh,
it's not a...
You are accountable for your actions, and you're accountable for you. And I am there to support and guide and to love you. But it is not my responsibility to hold your emotions for you, and it's not my responsibility to hold your trauma for you, right? I can temporarily do that, but I can't continuously do that. Mm-hmm. And I think where our conflict gets escalated is when the projections come into play, is where you project onto the conflict or onto me, feelings of abandonment or feelings of, I think shame is probably...
I think that's the biggest one.
The biggest one. And so how do we navigate out whenever you are projecting into a conflict? How do we navigate out towards the resolution, just the peace that we need to be able to move on?
No, we've talked about this, behind closed doors. We've talked about what we need to do. We've tried different things, code words like, hey, you're being old Michael, you're being shady, you know. Some have been more successful than others.
I don't think we've quite gotten there yet.
No, I think we're still searching, and I think it's going to be an ongoing thing. Not that we won't get there, but I mean, I think that, like we learned yesterday at our older daughter's appointment, our conditions change, and over time you have to change your actions to get the desired outcome.
Yeah.
So what works for us now and today may not work for us, you know, a month from now. So I know I'm willing, and I know you are, to just continue to meet each other where we're at and continue to get better.
Yeah. And to navigate through like those feelings that come up whenever you are feeling threatened or whenever you have that fight or flight response, how to kind of navigate through. Because I feel like, you know, fighting or navigating conflict for different couples is different. No, you know, no couple is the same. And so for some, you know, these projections may not be as instrumental in the conflict as kind of they are for ours, because of your experiences, right? I think that your experiences from childhood and in past relationships create a dynamic for us that I think makes it so that projections tend to be a little bit more frequent than they may be with other couples. Would you agree with that?
I would certainly agree that, you know, the two components you mentioned, upbringing and past relationships, it's certainly, I think, the big driver as to why my initial reactions are as they are.
Yeah. And so I think the big thing that we have really worked hard at is making sure that in conflict we are keeping a level tone. Mm-hmm. We are focused on the issue. We don't characterize and, you know, don't make it about personality or anything like that. I think for us with your ADHD, we have to, and your avoidance, right? Because you'll get uncomfortable. We as a couple, I have noticed we don't do well with long. We have to break them up, which I know you also don't love because then we have to revisit. But for us, that is better because I will get triggered when you start to get really distracted and I'm feeling very vulnerable. And so next week is boundaries. We're going to talk about boundaries, but that's a boundary that I've had to set when we are navigating conflict, when I find that I'm starting to lose you, right? Because of either you're uncomfortable or because of your ADHD or because you're kind of on a shame spiral, then we have to shut it down and come back and revisit it. And that's a boundary that I've had to set because I need to make sure for myself that I am getting the resolution and the true apology, like we talked about last time, in order for me to move on and not have to bring it up later. And so those are kind of things that we've had to elicit. Whoever said you shouldn't go to bed angry, I hope people know that's not a clinical thing. There is not research based around that. It can be very appropriate to go to sleep without something being resolved, right? Because sometimes people need the time and the space and the mental capacity to be able to come back and resolve something. And I know we have gone to bed. We have slept in separate beds at times when we are just, there have been two I can think of where we were just so frustrated with each other that we were unable to be productive in conversation. And that's completely healthy and appropriate. And the fact that you just paused and
I had to think for a moment.
but even then, you were uncomfortable with me disclosing that because you automatically went to a place, well, that is a negative representation of our relationship then. That means we're not healthy. That means we don't, right? Is that why you did that face?
I think, no, maybe a little bit. Maybe in the back of my mind, my subconscious.
I think that's normal. I think for couples, they've heard that age-old adage, and I think they think, oh no, then the relationship's in trouble. We can't. And I mean, I know a number of couples who have fantastic relationships, and they're some of my clients, and they never sleep in the same bed because some have sleep apnea and other sleep issues. And that's not, they're not even talking about discord, right? My point is, it can be very appropriate to not resolve at the time that the issue occurs, because sometimes we need a little bit more time. And so it's really about respecting the person, like you said, being kind, really honing in on what your person needs when it comes to conflict. Like, I know what triggers you and you know what triggers me. And so we have to lean into that. And I think we need to do a better job of leaning into that in conflict and really making sure, okay, did I resolve that trigger for my partner? Because we know what triggers each other. And to be fair to us, we never use it against each other, and you never should. That would be not fighting fair, is to ever use a triggers against. And so any kind of final thoughts before we kind of about fighting fair and making sure projections don't get in the way of conflict resolution and kind of moving through conflict?
No, it's not an easy topic to discuss. I know what my tendencies are. We've talked through them. I just look forward to continuing to get better and making us stronger.
Yeah, I do too. I love our relationship. Even I enjoy a good conflict. I think they are mentally stimulating, and I like to solve problems, especially the relational variety. But I'm also a weird bird as a therapist. So because that to me is what makes relationships have depth, is to be able to navigate through conflict, is to really understand another person. And with that comes boundaries, which we're going to talk about next time, is what are boundaries, the importance of boundaries, what happens if you don't have boundaries, and how that can really erode a relationship, and why enmeshment is not a good thing, despite what a lot of people come into couples therapy kind of thinking. And so with that, thanks for joining me today, babe. I appreciate you being here and being vulnerable and being willing to have the convo, because I know that being partnered with a therapist and married to a shrink can have its challenges when it comes to these types of conversations. And I appreciate you being willing to show up. And I love you.
I love you too. Appreciate the acknowledgement. Love
Bye,
you.
babe.